This podcast is hosted by the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at Dickinson College in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, USA, which is about a mile from the former grounds of the Carlisle Indian Industrial School. We are working to bring honest interpretations of the Carlisle Indian School that was in operation from 1879 until 1918. We honor the 7,800 Indigenous students from across the United States who came to Carlisle. The Indian School is a significant place of remembrance for our Native peoples. Because of the endurance, strength, and prayers from our people who went to the Carlisle Indian School, many of us are here today. Guwatsi! Hi everyone, it's yours truly, Dr. Mandy or Dr. Kauthui. I'm here with a very special relative, Gerilyn Tolino. Gerilyn, how's it going?
Hi, it's going okay. Going actually pretty good.
Awesome. And where are you zooming in from today?
Beltisanilla, Albuquerque, New Mexico.
It's a pleasure to be with you here and share story. I love to ask our relatives who come on just to share a little bit more about yourself. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your story. So who are you?
Today, Gerilyn Tolino and Chef Nakaidan Danslo, Tudachini Pashin, Kiani Ada Shiche, Anieta Chanelo. Ehot Adana, Sato Amansle, my Ketlis, I just about Nasha, Ray Beltisanilla, Dashavan. My name is Gerilyn Tolino. I am of the Mexican nomad wandering clan, born for the bitter water. My maternal grandparents are the Kia'ani, and my paternal grandparents are the folded arms people. I'm a mom. I reside here in Albuquerque. I work as a social worker. I've been in this field for over 24 years. Been working in nonprofit and government. Always felt like this was a field that I wanted to be in. I think that goes back to my upbringing and the role that my family had in the community. So I think there's a lot of feeling of service to others. I think part of that is because of who my great-grandfather was. My great-grandfather is known as Hastiin Tohaali. He's also known as Hastiin Bilagana. His English name is Tom Torlino. Tolino. His image has been used widely with the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. It was a postcard that was developed early on to be presented to Congress to talk about how the boarding schools was helping in the assimilation process. And so his before and after image has been utilized a lot in describing Carlisle and the history of Carlisle. And so I am the great-granddaughter of Tom Torlino.
Powerful, Gerilyn. And for those who may not know, I met Gerilyn through this healing journey and healing work. And I first actually heard about Gerilyn through one of my mentors, Dr. Sheila Nicholas, who is also a descendant of the Indian school. Her clan father, Louis Tiwanimo, who's an Olympian and runner. And Dr. Nicholas met you, Gerilyn, here in Carlisle. I remember hearing a little bit about your story through her story because she presented in Tucson, Arizona, and she showed a picture of you. And for many, many years, of course, I've seen the picture of Tom Torlino, and it's such a striking image, and that has been used and definitely exploited in all these different areas. And when I see that picture, sometimes, a lot of times in the before and after photographs, you don't know what happened to some of our relatives. When I heard your story through Dr. Nicholas, I was just amazed that at least at minimum I saw that his descendants was here and alive and thriving, and so it's such an honor to be with you, to connect with you in this way, because it adds more story to the photograph that a lot of us have seen and know about. So I'm just so honored to be here with you, and through the healing work that I've done here in Carlisle this year, I was able to connect with you, and then I invited you to be on our Center for the Futures of Native Peoples advisory board, because it's so important. Your family, your community could never be paid back in a way, where his legacy and photograph has just been used so widely. And at least in this way, though, in a small way, we could help host you here when you come to Carlisle's. I just honor you and honor your family in this capacity to share story in this really, really powerful way.
So, yeah, ayoba kahansin. I am very grateful for that. And when you asked me to join, I was very honored, and I think it's very important because I feel the same way. I think a lot of times there's the story, his photo, and there's no other than, the caption of his name, but there's nothing more. And then even with that sharing, I think there's a lot of assumptions that came about, and there was really not a whole lot of information that was shared. And more importantly, I think it also needs to come from the family, talking about what they know and those family story and, and giving that voice, that family voice to the photo. And so, yes, so definitely it's important.
How do you process the Carlisle Indian School, and, like, how do you process coming here to Carlisle? Like, we've had a chance to connect through our healing work in the last, like, few months, and I'm just curious to know, like, how are you thinking about all of this in light of, your relative being, again, one of the most recognizable images and relatives, like, that we know in the boarding school era?
When I think about it, I'm thinking how that journey began for me. There was a couple of years back, and this was right when NABS, the Native American National Healing NABS, the board was coming together, and there was, I think, an announcement that came out. And there was going to be a conference, and there was, discussion about a 100-year anniversary of Carlisle, and an announcement that, that had went out seeking speakers. And then at the same time, just by that's the whole thing, like, with Indian communities, right? We kind of, like, know someone who knows someone who knows someone else, and those networks, they build. And I happen to be working at a Native nonprofit here in Albuquerque, and there was a woman who is Oklahoma Native, and she was friends with the artist Goldshorn, who was doing putting together an exhibit as part of that celebration, that 100-year, I don't know if I wanna call it celebration, that 100-year anniversary. And so she had sent a message saying, "This came up through one of my friends," and she goes, "I know the last name. Is this someone that you're related to?" And I saw it, I'm like, "Oh my goodness, yes, yes." And she said, "There's also someone who spoke about being related to this person. Do you by chance know that person?" And that actually was my cousin who was attending IAIA at the time, and she had shared, the story initially. And I said, "Yes, actually, yes, that's my cousin, but yes, we're all, from the same family." And so from that, that opened that up. When I saw that, then by pure chance, there was I'm not sure what exactly was happening. I think I might have been moving some book in my house, and we were moving or cleaning something. And so I'd moved this one of my native history book, and out popped the postcard. And I remembered, and I looked at it, and it was the image, the before and after image. And then I remembered. I said, "Oh yeah, this is where my grandfather, Tom C. Tolino, shared with me, gosh, back in 1997, I would say. And I was in school. I was just about ready to get ready to, it must have been like Thanksgiving break or something like that. And I was getting ready to head back to school. And, as I'm getting ready, packing up, and he would always do like a fanning off. He would do like a blessing. He would do a prayer for me as I would, go back to school. In those prayers, he would always, talk about schooling and keeping, being strong, not to be homesick, to be able to, take in that information, just some really good prayers and affirmation and what I was doing. But on this particular time, he pulled out the postcard, and he said, this is my father." And I looked at it and I was like, "Oh, okay." Like, and then I asked him, "What's his name?" "Hashogenda." And then so he started to tell me who he was and told me his name. And then, I'm looking at the card in the back and it had, Carlisle, Navajo student at Carlisle Industrial School, Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And and he said, "I want you to have it." So I had it and I took it with me. And been carrying it ever since. So I think it was probably maybe one of my old textbooks that it came out, years later. It pulled it all together. So from that point, I knew that I wanted to learn more. I wanted to see what else was available, in the world. And just at that time, I was also a part of the ACES student group, and we were traveling. We had gone to Colorado State University, and that's when I think I've shared where it was like the internet was brand new and it was all dial up and all of these different things. And so, with technology, there was just that helped to open a lot of the doors. A lot of that information was shared, more information was surfacing, and being able to identify books, different articles through the university library, just doing like that research, just trying to find what was there. And so that was my first introduction. But it was my grandfather, Tom C. Tolino, who shared that. And years later, even now I think about it and I wonder what, made him share that with me. I think about it and I think it was more because of going to school. I'm a first generation college student. So I think he wanted to reinforce how, our family had been through that type of process and in a way, support as well and give me that courage too, just to keep pushing, keep going. And and I know that's a key thing, especially with Native students too, because that's a whole other realm that we were never really familiar with. And we're navigating ourselves on our own out there in the world. And and it was really important to have that and know these prayers were already set in place and they continue and they give us that strength to push on through. So that's how I like to think about it, and that's where everything started.
So when you come to Carlisle and actually walk in the very footsteps of our native relatives, what is that like for you?
Well, for me, just, like I mentioned about the whole 100-year event that happened. So when I submitted my proposal to speak and share my grandfather's story, I immediately went into prayer and I said, I need to know how I need to approach this. So I went that way because I know that's what my grandfather would have wanted and what he would have done. And so that's what I did. That's the first thing I did. I asked permission because not knowing, what I was going to face, I needed to make sure that I was gonna do it in a respectful way, and so that's what I did. From there, I let that guide me. There was some I know we've talked about this, about the Carlisle vortex, and I had quite an interesting trip that first round. It was my plane out of Albuquerque, something happened to the tire, and then the flight got canceled, and then I had to wait, like, 6 hours for a tire to, have to be flown in from somewhere else so they could put it on the plane I was gonna be riding into Chicago, and then that happened. I flew to Chicago, and then I had to spend overnight at O'Hare Airport. Had the I was carrying my luggage, and then they told us we couldn't stay in the airport, that we had to stand, go out, and we had to go through that whole check-in it was insane. And then so I kept going and I'm thinking, "Okay, you know, creator, what's happening? What's going on? What is this telling me?" But I kept praying. "I'm gonna get there, I'm gonna get there." And then finally, at O'Hare, we got on the flight and we got to get to Harrisburg, got the rental, drove straight to Carlisle and made it. and, I was at the tail end of the conference. But before I know I was already running late, but before I even got into Carlisle, I was driving on a little country road and I saw a cornfield. I stopped and I got out. Took my cornmeal. I don't know whose cornfield it was, but I went right in there and I just made my way and I put my offerings down and I said, "I'm here, grandfather, I'm here. I don't know what I'm going to encounter, but I know you were here first and you put down these prayers. And with those prayers, they'll still protect me, they'll still help as I go in your footsteps, as I, take this journey. I know as a male, who is different. And I said, as your granddaughter, protect me too. Help me to be strong with what I may encounter." And I put my cornmeal down and I spoke and I said, just like when my grandfather Tom C would pray for me, those prayers were there. And we just kind of, build on it and reactivate it. I know that's what he did because that's what our family always did. And so carrying that through was important. That's what I did beforehand. And and then I got back on the road and then I got to the hotel and I checked in right before I was going to speak. So it was just like minutes, minutes, minutes. And and that's what I did. And I think about that and I do that every time. So, before that set that precedence, that set those steps for me.
That's powerful, Gerilyn. Thank you for sharing that journey. It is like the Carlisle vortex. I don't know what it is. But traveling here, traveling out of here is always seems to be quite an adventure coming to Carlisle. We've chatted a lot these last like few months, especially recently. There's a lot that's happened this year and three major events, that occurred nationally. For those who may not know, of course, is the release of the second volume of the Federal Indian Boarding School investigative report, and then President Biden's apology in October at the Gila River Indian community. And then now, within the last like 5 days or so, last week, within the week, the Carlisle Federal Indian Boarding School National Monument has been established. And I'm curious to know what you think about all of this that has transpired this year.
It's just been incredible. It's just beyond my wildest dreams. Some things that I thought would never come to be is now happen and it's building that momentum. And I know it's because of, Deb Halalan. And I have a Deb story and I didn't share this before. So after I did that first trip to Carlisle, I came back, I believe it was on a Saturday, and that Sunday was during Bilwin Fiesta. And it just so happened to be that I was attending an event within a community member's home, and they indicated that, she was going to be coming in. And I had my daughters with me, and it was actually my daughter's teacher, her home. And she said, "Oh, yeah, they're gonna be coming in." I was like, "Oh my goodness." She was just running to become within the United States, the House of Representatives. She was campaigning. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get to meet her. That's gonna be so cool." So we are there and they this family hosts this event every year during Boeing Fiesta. And so she came in and we are just kind of like, "Oh, we gotta talk to her." In the kitchen, she was standing, and I went up to her, introduced myself, and I said, "La da da, I went to Carlisle." And she looks at me and she said, "You did?" I said, "Yeah." And then I shared my grandfather's picture, and I said, I spoke about him and talked about, our family story. And she looked at me and she's just, holding my hand, and she says, "We have to do something." I said, "Yeah, we do. We have to honor them." And she said, "Yeah, we will." And that was over 6 years ago. She had said that. She's just getting started. Hearing that from her and, her campaign, motto was "Be fierce," and it was like, you could feel that. And I know, with her work and her talking and sharing those stories, whether it was my grandfathers or other community members, across the country, that carried a lot of weight. And I think, that has truly helped because she spoke of it and made it, important. And I know she had a really good, a big part in it. And I'm so grateful to her. And I know it's genuine and it just makes me proud because just, my little story in this whole journey and, she's able to build on it and use it too. And that's what makes it so, important.
Wow, yeah, it is so impactful and important, and for those who may not know, Tom Torlino's photo is actually used in the newly released, National Park Service brochure, and for this national monument, and it is imprinted in there in this mass communication way. So what are your thoughts on that, about the National Park Service using his photograph?
It's so surreal. When I saw it, I was like, "Wow, wow." But I also understand why as well, because his photo has been shared over and over, and I think about it, like, part of the research that I've been doing independently is identifying when his photo is used, where it's shared, whether it's, with social media, memes, just I'm just looking, I will Google and I'll look and I'll, if it's in a negative way, I address them and I say, no, that's not how we use that. It's not funny to me and it's very disrespectful to my family. So you need to take it down. But I also felt it was important to address even, at the academic level and how it was used. Because I know that there I've seen some videos on YouTube and how it was used, and I've addressed those, professors and say, "What was the point of this?" And how I understood what it was, but to me, it seemed like it was just more of a kind of like, building them up versus, there's a story there. It's just not, an opportunity for you to make money or benefit from that. These are people. Please do more research on that because that's not, just it. There's more to it.
Can you share more about the example, this in the last couple of months, there was one story that you had shared, one example, about eBay, about there was a cabinet card, and for those who may not know, those cabinet cards were like 4 by 6 or 5 by 7 kind of postcards looking, documents or just cards that were used for propaganda really to like exploit our native people, in my opinion. But can you share the story about how that was made available on eBay and what that process looked like for that bidding?
Yes, it was, I became aware of this, this other postcard that was, featured on eBay. It was another photo that was made outside of Carlisle, and it was the first time I had ever seen it. I think that anybody had ever seen it. It was shared by a collector out of Arizona, and I went up for bid. I saw it and started to watch it. They had I was able to look in the back and see where, the who the photographer was, where it originated, and then started to look to see where it was based out of. So it looked like it was a photographer out of Philadelphia, which does coincide with my grandfather's one of the placements he was in, and he was placed in it when an outing placement that was done with the Carlisle students, and so he was placed, north of Philadelphia. It seems that he posed for that in Philadelphia, and so that's where that postcard came from. But in watching that photograph, that postcard, it ended up being sold for 3,000, about 3,700 or so. And it's hard because, that's a family member. That's a photo that, it just I don't even know how to describe it. It's just, nowadays, we're very protective about how our children's images are used because of a lot of the abuses that have happened with photos. To me, it's the same. There can be abuse, of it, but at the same time, it wasn't theirs to share.
Yeah, I actually, pulled up the screenshot you sent me, just as a reminder. I haven't looked at this in a while, and it actually was at $5,700.
Oh, okay.
And I was talking to Jim Gerenser, who's one of the archivists here who leads the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center, and I was asking him, like, how much do these cabinet cards usually cost that they go on auction? And even just that in general, right? Like, that's so problematic in my opinion because it's another form of exploitation in my opinion because I think those should just go to the families. But he was saying that usually some of those cabinet cards can go like 300, 4, 500, 6, 7, 800, less than 1,000. And so, but because this photograph, because of who he is and how well known he is by his images, it went several $1,000s. In my opinion, the right thing to do would just been to give it to your families. But then here we see it on eBay. It's this picture being sold for that amount of money. It's frustrating in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, and it kind of just reflects, on the whole policy as well. You think about, like, within the African American community and Henrietta Lacks, what happened with her DNA and how that was used. She went in to a facility to get help for her illness, but then they ended up using, her body as part of, the scientific exploration. And the family went back and then they sued. And I know there is also, as far as like case law, one of the images, I think it was Harvard, one of the families of a slave who was photographed, they challenged that. They said, "That's our family member. We need to have control of that, and you used it without our permission." And they successfully went after Harvard, and they were able to get that. So, in my mind, those are the things that it's building up to, because I can think about there's the whole, Route 66. Get your kicks on Route 66, and then even with the Harvey family and the hotels and, like, how that was all marketed. And then you could still go driving down, the interstate and find a little gift shop, and you see it all these little collectibles. I usually stop there and I look. And I look around and I like, "Oh, there's the photograph. I'm gonna go look at those postcards. I'm gonna see." Been a couple of times where I come across it and I will buy all of it. I will take it all. I mean, that's probably counterproductive because somebody's getting the money, but, like, I take those photos. I'm like, "These are mine." In my mind, I'm like, "These are my family, so I'm gonna take them." But I know that, that's happened. And, like, I've seen magnets in these little trinket shops as well.
Dang. Ah, that's like I should have another podcast episode about that. Just the imagery of our native people. Even here in Carlisle, I don't know if you've seen them before in your travels here, but and behind one of the restaurants, kind of like in an alleyway, there's these huge metal plates, and it has the Indian head. It's like a kind of a caricature Indian head, and it says Carlisle under one of them, and then another one has the caricature Indian head, and then it says Indian below it. And it's just like and it's like a bar. Like I don't know, it's like some these random signs.
I've seen some of them, yeah, like the older stuff, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a whole nother whole nother podcast episode we should have. So, as we close in this story time, I wanted to see if there was anything else that you would like to share or add.
When I started this, collecting the stories and putting together information about my great-grandfather, really wanted to utilize it as from a place of healing. As a social worker, I hold a lot of stories families have shared with me in their own life and the traumas that they've encountered. And I think about that and how that affects each of them in that way. So for me, that's where I'm coming from when I speak of him and putting a voice to his image and who he is. Before he went to Carlisle, he was training. He was training to be a medicine at classic. And his father, my great great grandfather, was a medicine man. And so I've seen some of documents of that. I've come across some information from Washington Matthews, who was a cultural anthropologist who did some early research on Navajo, but he's also, I think, better known for some of his work on the plain. So he was able to document that. And Washington Matthews did have interpreters. My great grandfather was one of those. He wasn't one of the regular interpreters that he used, but he had about five that he utilized, and so they would help take him out. And so Washington Matthews does have. He was able to do some recording on wax cylinders. But learning all of that and knowing that his story had been documented in some way, and it's just putting those pieces together. And then talking with family and thinking about as I was growing up, I was like, "Oh, yeah, I remember I have all these memories about my grandparents, my aunts and my great aunts, my great uncles who were the children of Tom Torlino. And when they would come together and I'd hear their stories, even though I was a little kid, playing in the dirt they would have these stories, and I remember them. It's definitely been a place in my heart for a long time, and putting those both what was going on historically and then what was going on within my family, and then putting those pieces together, that's been very healing for me. And I know a lot of people may not have that for them. They just have parts of it, or maybe, they're not ready to talk about it. And for me, that's why it was so important to ask permission to say, where do I start? Is it okay that I share that? And that part of that healing, it's like, you decide. And I know that some of my family, it's difficult for them as well, but maybe they're just not able to put it into words. And I listen, out of respect and respectful of, their feelings as well. And so when I share, it's more from my experience and what I've been able to piece together. But yes, everybody's story is different as far as the Indian boarding school. And for me, he was already one that was taking those steps. And I like to see him as a warrior in that way because he didn't know what he was going to encounter. Like, I'm going to go and see what this is about. I mean, I'm not sure if he, had that same mindset, but like as a warrior, you do go in, it's like you're going into battle not knowing what you're going to encounter. And he took those steps. He did what he knew and how to, take care of himself, and he returned. He's very fortunate to survive. Those are the stories that I would hear from my grandparents. That's the point that, that I'm coming from.
Well, I appreciate you so much, Geraldine. It's an honor to be with you on this healing journey, and I just really honor you and respect you, and thank you so much for spending time with us today to share story and to honor our relatives who have taken the journey here to Carlisle and are still you and I now are working through this, healing through this. So I just really appreciate you and honor you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much. I mean, you're like we've talked about, how the spider web and then those connections. I think this is very much a part of that, having that connection, even if it was through years back before we even met, it was already being pieced together and that we can come together and talk about this because it's going to take us relatives to get through this to be strong. And I know sometimes it's hard, not knowing because it's like, how do we even do this? How does this even work? And and I think about that now, as I'm getting older myself, and I'm like, "Oh my goodness, okay, so I'm gonna be an elder now." I can even, I can be a grandma, so I'm like, "Okay, what do I wanna, share with my grandchildren with?" Yeah, and so I think about that, and it's like, "Okay," and it starts with, being a good relative and, and having those connections and having people come together and support one another, and I'm appreciative of you, and that's how I see it. And I do my offerings and I speak of you, and I know it's hard.
I appreciate you. That just warms my heart. I appreciate that. We're doing this together. You're anchored at home and I'm tethered to back home, and so it helps me. Those
Mhm.
prayers help for sure.
Yeah, yeah. And I know I think about it and I'm like, well, I think it's the New Mexico women, like, with Secretary of Interior Deb Haaland, and it's like, "Oh, okay, yeah, so this is where it is," and it's important to me too because, I'm a visitor in Albuquerque. This is, not my homeland. So every morning it's like, I give the offerings and because, I'm a visitor and this is what was done, before me and it needs to continue. And that's what I always tell everyone. Like, we're visitors, so we need to be respectful.
Yes. Awesome. So I just love you, Gerilyn. Thanks for being on the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, everyone. Thank you so much for listening and sharing space with us in this time of community and storytelling. And we hope that you have a wonderful day and we'll talk to you later. Bye, everyone.
Gonna
Remember to leave us a 5-star rating for our podcast. Special thanks to our relative, Gerilyn Tolino, for sharing stories with us. We honor her and Hastiin Tohaali, or known as Tom Torlino. We recognize that Hastiin Tohaali's images have been used widely for decades without the permission of his family. We are grateful that in a small way, bringing his story forward through the oral tradition here in Carlisle, in these airwaves, in this space and time, amplifies his story in an honorable way, which directly counters how his images were exploited here in Carlisle and beyond. If you want to learn more about the Carlisle Indian Industrial School, visit the Carlisle Indian School Digital Resource Center at carlisleindian.dickinson.edu. Many thanks to Brenda Landis for teaching me the technical process of producing a podcast. Learn more about the Center for the Futures of Native Peoples at dickinson.edu/CFNP. Follow us on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and X at CFNP Dickinson. Authenticity is important. You can learn more about me at amandacharmiah.com. You spell my last name CHEROMIAH. You can also connect with me at drchairmaya on TikTok. That is, if it still exists after January 19th. You can connect with me on Instagram, X, and LinkedIn. You can also email me at CHEROMIA@dickinson.edu. I honor my relatives who came to the Carlisle Indian School. Because of them, I am here. And in the words of Chief Philip Whiteman Jr. from Northern Cheyenne and a descendant from the Carlisle Indian School, he says, I love you and there is nothing you can do about it. Hashjame Gume, Dwa, thank you so much, relatives, for listening. Until next time.